Ever wish you could, like, test drive a product idea before you actually commit to building it? Like, what if you could know if it was going to work before you put in all the time and money?
Well, that's what we're diving into today, right? Using AI to basically simulate if a feature is going to be successful before it even exists.
Yeah. It's almost like having a crystal ball, but instead of relying on, gut feeling, it's all data driven. We're talking about moving away from, I think this will work, to, I have data that backs this up. This is likely to be successful.
So, from the articles you shared, this AI-driven simulation thing, it's not some futuristic fantasy, right? Like, companies are actually using this right now to make decisions. Absolutely, it's happening right now. And basically what it boils down to is you're building a virtual version of your product, almost like a video game version. And this model, this virtual product, it runs on real data, not just guesses. We're talking about customer feedback, those survey results you get, all those business metrics you're tracking, all of that gets plugged in.
So instead of just brainstorming and kind of throwing things at the wall to see what sticks, you're creating this like data-rich environment to test those ideas first.
Exactly. It's about being more targeted, more strategic. Imagine, let's say, you're struggling with your onboarding process. Users are dropping off. They're not engaging. You can actually simulate different onboarding flows, different ways to onboard users, and the AI can tell you which one is most likely to keep users engaged, reduce that drop-off.
That's wild. And from what I was reading, the AI can even help you figure out what questions to ask in the first place before you even start building anything, right?
Yeah, that's one of the really cool things. So you can take all that user feedback you've got,
Mm-hmm.
the completion rates, those points where people are abandoning the process, all of that, and you can feed it into a tool like, say, ChatGPT, for example. And you might be surprised, but it can actually analyze that data and suggest hypotheses for you to test.
Wait, ChatGPT, the chatbot that everyone and their grandma is talking about these days?
The one and only. You could literally ask it, hey, what changes can I make to my onboarding flow that are most likely to increase my user retention? It can even suggest what to A/B test based on the patterns it sees in your data.
It's like having this AI product manager on your team, just like constantly crunching data and suggesting, hey, you should test this, try that. It's amazing.
Right. It's like having this extra brain power, but it's all data-driven. And it's not just about coming up with new ideas. It's about validating the ideas you already have before you sink a ton of time and resources into something that might not work.
Like a safety net almost, preventing you from going too far down a path that might lead to nowhere. But how does it actually work? Like, what's going on behind the scenes with this simulation stuff?
So think of it like building this virtual world where you can run experiments without any real-world consequences, right? It's like a safe space to play around with different scenarios and see what happens.
So instead of test tubes and beakers, it's all algorithms and data.
Exactly. The articles even mention that, get this, Amazon, they use a similar kind of approach internally to figure out how like pricing changes would affect their bottom line.
Wow, Amazon, if Amazon is using it, it must be legit.
Right. They're using AI and simulations for everything from figuring out the best way to manage their warehouses to, those personalized product recommendations they're famous for.
Hmm.
Even tiny little efficiency gains can translate into huge savings when you're a company that big.
Makes you wonder what kind of crazy insights they've discovered that we don't even know about. But this kind of technology, it's not just for the Amazons of the world, is it?
Not at all. These tools are becoming more and more accessible to businesses of all sizes. You don't need to be a tech giant to start playing around with this stuff.
So if we're thinking about starting small, like we've got ChatGPT as an entry point, but what about when you're ready to level up? What are some of the more, heavy-duty tools out there?
If you're looking for something more robust, something with more horsepower, platforms like Google Vertex AI and Amazon SageMaker, they're designed for building these really sophisticated machine learning models. You get a lot more flexibility and control over the entire simulation process.
Those sound amazing, but maybe a little intimidating for someone who's just starting out, right?
Yeah, they can be a bit daunting at first, but they're also designed with, user-friendly interfaces, and there's a ton of documentation out there. You don't need to be a data scientist to figure it out.
So no matter what your skill level or budget, there's probably a tool out there for you. But the big question is like, how accurate are these simulations? Can we really trust AI to predict the future of our products?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, it depends. The accuracy of your simulation, it really depends on a few things. The biggest one, the quality of your data.
garbage in, garbage out risk.
Exactly.
Yep.
If you're feeding your AI bad data, you're going to get unreliable predictions. That's just the name of the game.
Yeah.
The other thing to keep in mind is the complexity of your model. A really simple model, it's not going to be as accurate as one that takes into account all those different nuances and variables.
Oh, it's like a trade-off then. Simplicity versus accuracy.
To some extent, yes. But even those simpler models, they can still give you really valuable insights, especially when you're just starting out. As you get more comfortable, you can always add more complexity, make those predictions even more precise.
It's like any skill, I guess. The more you put in, the more you get out. But even if the predictions aren't perfect, I think the article's made a really good point. Those AI simulations, they still give you a really valuable framework for making decisions, right?
Absolutely. It's about understanding the risks, mitigating them as much as possible, not necessarily about completely eliminating them. It's about using data to make smarter choices instead of just going with your gut.
So not about predicting the future with like 100% certainty, but more about reducing uncertainty and making those, calculated risks.
Exactly. And the more you work with these tools, the better you'll get at understanding the results, figuring out what they really mean, and, factoring in those things that the AI might miss.
A true partnership. Human intuition and AI insights working together.
Exactly. And when you find that balance, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
And speaking of magic, one of the most practical applications for this kind of technology is in A/B testing.
A/B testing, right. It's like the gold standard for like optimizing anything, websites, email campaigns, whatever. But it always meant actually building both versions, which, let's be real, can get really expensive really fast.
And that's where these AI-driven simulations, they really come in handy. You can basically run A/B tests virtually, like in that simulated world, without actually building a single thing.
So like, let's say I'm testing out different landing pages. I could see which one is going to perform better before I even spend the time and money to create both of them for real.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to landing pages. Think about things like onboarding flows, different pricing models, even little things like the words you use on a call to action. You can simulate all of that, compare them side by side, and see what happens.
It's like having a time machine, but for your product, right? You can test drive all these different possibilities, all these different futures, and kind of choose which one you want to step into.
Love that analogy.
Yeah.
And remember, you can run these simulations so much faster and way cheaper than doing traditional A/B testing.
So it's faster, it's cheaper, it's less risky. It's like, what's the downside? But the articles, they went even further, right? They were talking about using AI to actually predict how users are going to behave. That sounds crazy complex.
It is complex, but it's also one of the most powerful things you can do with AI in this space. So by analyzing how users have behaved in the past, you can start to build these models that are really good at predicting how they're going to react to new features, new changes you make to your product.
So it's like those recommendation algorithms we see everywhere now, like when Netflix suggests a movie or Amazon suggests a product. But instead, it's suggesting features we should add or tweaks we should make to our product based on what it thinks our users are going to want.
Exactly. And it's surprisingly accurate, like really accurate, especially if you've got a good amount of data to work with.
Can you give us an example? Like, how would this play out in the real world?
Okay, imagine you're like a music streaming service and you're thinking about adding this new feature collaborative playlists. Sounds like something people would use, right?
Sign me up. I would use that in a heartbeat.
Right. But before you go and build it, wouldn't it be smart to have a sense of how well it's going to perform? That's where these simulations come in. You could use AI to predict things like, what are the adoption rates going to look like? How often are people going to use this feature? How might it affect other metrics like listening time or even subscriptions?
It's like running a beta test, but you don't even have to build the actual feature yet.
Exactly. It's a game changer. That kind of predictive power, it's invaluable, especially when you're trying to figure out what features to prioritize, making sure you're working on the stuff that's really going to resonate with your users.
Okay, so this all sounds amazing, obviously, but are there any downsides? Like, what do we need to be careful about with these AI-driven simulations?
Well, like anything else, it's not perfect, right?
Right.
It's not a magic bullet. It's a tool, and its effectiveness really depends on the person who's using it. One of the big things to watch out for is you need to make sure you're using the right data.
Oh, right. Like we were saying before, garbage in, garbage out.
100%. If you're training your AI on bad data, you're going to get bad predictions. Simple as that. Making sure your data is clean, accurate, and actually relevant to the problem you're trying to solve is absolutely crucial.
Data quality is key. What else? Any other red flags we should be aware of?
Yeah, the other big challenge, and this is something that comes up a lot with AI, it's often called the black box problem. So with some of these more complex models, it can be tough to understand how the AI actually arrived at its predictions.
So the AI might tell us what's going to happen, but it can't really explain why.
Exactly. And that lack of transparency, it can be a real obstacle, especially when you're trying to explain your decisions to other people, like stakeholders, or trying to get buy-in for a new project.
Right, because it's not enough to just trust the machine. We have to understand it too.
It's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between human intelligence and artificial intelligence, not relying too heavily on one or the other.
A dance, not a dictatorship.
I like that. So we've talked a lot about the what, right?
Huh.
The power of AI-driven simulations. And we've talked about the why, like how this has the potential to completely change how we develop products. So for our listeners who are like, okay, I'm sold, how do I actually do this? What are some practical tips for someone who wants to start implementing this stuff? Well, the good news is you don't need to be like a coding whiz or anything to get started with this. And you don't need a huge budget either.
Okay, that's good to hear. So for someone who's listening who's like, this sounds amazing, but where do I even start? What would you recommend?
Honestly, just start playing around with some of the tools that are already out there. We've talked about ChatGPT, right? Even the free version, it's surprisingly powerful. Start feeding it some of your data, ask it to help you come up with some hypotheses, see what it comes up with.
So dip your toes in. Don't be afraid to experiment a little.
Exactly. And then as you get more comfortable, you can start exploring some of the more, advanced tools, the more advanced techniques. The important thing is to start small, don't get overwhelmed, and, be willing to learn as you go.
You mentioned data, and we talked about how important data quality is for all of this. Any tips on how to make sure you're collecting the right data in the first place and that it's, clean and usable?
Yeah, for sure. First thing is just take a look at what you're already collecting. You might be surprised. A lot of companies, they're sitting on this gold mine of data and they don't even realize it. Think about it. User demographics, website analytics, customer support tickets, even stuff like social media engagement, all of that, it's valuable data that you can use for these simulations.
It's like that saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. You've got to start gathering that data.
Right. So figure out what you have, and then you can see if there are any gaps. Like what data are you missing that would be really helpful to have, and then you can brainstorm ways to fill those gaps.
What if you don't have a ton of data yet? Like say you're a smaller company, you're just starting out. Is this AI simulation stuff still an option?
Absolutely. There are platforms out there specifically designed for smaller businesses, startups, that don't require these massive data sets to get started.
Oh, okay, that's good to know. For a minute there, I was worried this was just a game of the big guys.
Not at all. And even if you have a smaller data set, there are still things you can do. There are techniques like data augmentation, where you're essentially artificially increasing the size of your data set, right, or even synthetic data generation, where you use your existing data to create new, similar data points. So there are ways to work around it, even if you're starting small.
Okay, cool. We've mentioned a few different tools like ChatGPT, Google Vertex AI, Amazon SageMaker. Any advice on how to choose the right tool for the job?
Yeah, it really depends, right? What are your specific needs? What are your resources? ChatGPT, it's a great starting point, like we said. It's accessible, it's user-friendly, it's perfect for just kind of like testing the waters, experimenting. But if you're really serious about this and you have the budget for it, then yeah, those more robust platforms like Vertex AI or SageMaker, those might be worth looking into.
It's like anything else, right? Choosing the right tool for the job. You wouldn't use a hammer to tighten a screw.
Exactly. And just like with any tool, there's going to be a learning curve. But the good news is there are tons of resources out there. There are online tutorials. There are dedicated support teams. Don't be afraid to, ask for help.
Right, because that's how you really learn, right? By diving in and figuring it out as you go.
100%. And the potential payoff is huge. We're talking about building better products faster, more efficiently, all while avoiding those costly mistakes. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
Yeah, the future of product development is here, and it's all about data.
It really is. This isn't just some passing trend, these AI-driven simulations. They're fundamentally changing how we design and build products. So embrace the technology, experiment with it, and see what you could do.
I love it. Thanks for taking the time to walk us through all of this. It's been really eye-opening.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk about this stuff.
And for our listeners, thanks for tuning in to another deep dive. Until next time, keep innovating, keep iterating, and keep that data close at hand.